starting a company, every founder says 3 things. No matter what the business or the market, 3 things. First, there is a serious problem with the status quo. Something is broken, something is missing, life could be so much better. Second, the problem cannot be solved by current providers nor current approaches. An entirely new entrant, a whole new company is required. And third, everyone else who could start that company and solve that problem is unworthy. I alone can fix it, and therefore I can do no other than start this company. Consider, for just a moment, the sheer audacity of this perspective. Who else talks like this? Our country is broken, there is no fix within the current system, no one else can solve these problems, only I can fix it. If this reminds you of a certain public figure, it may or may not be a coincidence. My point is that the founder's identity is at its heart discontent, oppositional, and audacious. She is an insurgent, and her company is an insurgency. That's truth number 1 about identity. Here's number 2 about the world. It's arguably quite irrational to start a company. The odds do not welcome, and the mortality rates are high. Just under 50,000 software startups were founded in the US since 1990. 11,300 of those raised more than $5 million in today's dollars, and half raised more than $20 million. Of these 5,800, 290 went public, about 5%. And of those, about 1/8 are worth more than $5 billion today, about 1 out of 1,300. Expand that perspective globally, and the odds are much worse. About 1 in every 14,000 reach the $5 billion mark. Starting a company is much closer to reckless long shot than sure thing. And yet we try. So let me use a different word, improbable rather than reckless. How does one of these improbable insurgencies actually succeed? We have to start by asking a different question, one that every insurgent must ask. How does my smaller, weaker force fight against the larger, stronger ones arrayed against me? We know that the smaller force can win from history. In 480 BC, 7,000 Spartans held 300,000 Persians to a standstill in the Battle of Thermopylae. In 1415, 6,000 English defeated 30,000 French in the Battle of Agincourt. In its infancy, this country defeated the world's largest empire in the Revolutionary War, only to lose 200 years later to the much smaller forces of the NVA and the Viet Cong. And, in a galaxy far, far away, the ragtag rebel alliance was able to destroy a fully operational Imperial Death Star. So we have empirical proof. How does the smaller, weaker force defeat the larger, stronger one? This is the question that tormented me and my co-founders 23 years ago when we founded our company, Guidewire Software. To set the scene, the year is 2001, and we are starting a company. We had all the requisite ingredients: a bold idea, dev expertise, a willingness to defer gratification, and a garage. And yet, it only took an hour that first day to realize a humbling truth: that there is a fine line between an intrepid band of revolutionaries who will change the world and 6 unemployed dudes with a PowerPoint presentation taking a reckless long shot. My company's journey was an arduous climb, and many times I longed to quit. Here's the TLDR timeline. Concept in late 2000, at the peak of the dot-com boom. Money is free, the internet is bringing the world together, talent is scarce. First day in the office was 2 weeks after 9/11. Now talent is free, the world is a dangerous place, and no one is investing. First customer signs 18 months later, and then cancels 4 months after that. 3 months later, with less than 100,000 of our bootstrap funds in the bank, second and third customers sign. We close a Series A with the only 2 VCs that go more than 1 meeting with us. And in that glorious moment, we sell half the company for $4 million. That's right, 4, not 4T. It was a different, much sadder time. 2 more rounds of funding over the next 6 years, including a Series C led by the distinguished firm of which I am now a part, Battery, to total $29 million raised. 4 years later, an IPO, the first of 2012, and we closed the first day at $1.1 billion. I'm CEO for the next 7 years, transitioning to chairman in 2019. Today, June 2024, the company sits at just under $1 billion of revenue and around $10 billion in value. But I want to return to that earlier chapter, long before we knew that it would all work out. For me, that time is characterized by two equally strong emotions: terror and rage. The terror was the feeling of a gambler all in on one outcome. The rage was the feeling of the insurgent, asking again, obsessively, how does my smaller, weaker force defeat the larger, stronger, more established ones against me? I see founders get distracted from this question all the time, despite it being so obvious and critical. Sometimes they forget the answer with which they started, and that is my point today. Lest you have forgotten, I want to remind you of the three critical powers intrinsic to insurgency itself. The first power is to name the enemy. Capitalism is not a zero-sum game, but insurgency is. Here's a quote worth remembering: "It is not enough to succeed. Others must fail." The goal is to break the status quo. Whoever is invested in that status quo, that's the enemy. The insurgent must burn with hatred for the enemy. Now remember, the incumbents, they don't burn with hatred. They have massages and foosball tables where they work. Life is too good to get riled up. The feast is too abundant. But for the insurgent, the enemy stands in the way of all good things. You can see that they are indolent and unworthy. You want them to suffer defeat and disgrace. You want their children to go hungry. If this sounds too bloodthirsty for you, well, you just might be in the wrong line of work. But I hasten to add, the enemy doesn't have to be human. Here is a picture of Guidewires Enemy, a remorseless AI killing machine. Just kidding. Here it is. This is the most effective slide that I ever used. Every company meeting, every sales call, I would say, this is Guidewires Enemy, the 1980s era COBOL mainframe legacy insurance core system. We will not rest until they are all dead and buried. Why is it so important to name the enemy? Because it activates the energies of your team, their tribal impulse to win as a group. Because it renders specific the frame of the contest. Because it forces you to ask, every minute, every day, how, specifically, are we going to beat this thing? Where are we strong? Where are they weak? And most importantly, defining the enemy defines the boundaries of the mission, that which you're going to do. A vague definition of the enemy means a vague mission, and no insurgent can afford to be vague. The second superpower, to define a pure strategy. At its origin, a startup has no assets, no capital, no product, no brand, no customers, no references, no revenue, no infrastructure. The saving grace of this naked state is weightlessness. The insurgent is unburdened by prior conceptions of the problem. He has no surface area to defend. He can bring his whole force to bear on the enemy's weakest joint. This is the story of every asymmetric military victory in history. So what is a pure strategy? It has only two elements: a diagnosis and a plan. The diagnosis is an account of how things are and why they are that way. It is a high-resolution map of the enemy's assets and vulnerabilities. The plan is a theory of attack. Maybe it's a new offering with 10x the benefit for a specific segment. Maybe it's a way of co-opting a discontented channel. Maybe it's a neglected persona that is longing to be made a hero. But informed by the diagnosis, the plan defines a vector of attack. It identifies where that breakthrough can be achieved, and then how that breakthrough can be exploited to maximum advantage. A diagnosis without a plan is vacuous, and a plan without a diagnosis is wishful thinking. What did this look like for Guidewire? In brief, our diagnosis was that a $2.5 trillion global industry, P&C insurance, was crippled by legacy core systems. They look like this on the outside and have crazy IT architectures that look like this on the inside, and they had become structural impediments to insurance profitability. We pounded home the argument. A 21st century insurance operation is impossible without a software platform that is built on a modern N-tier architecture. Now, it's obvious in 2024 that a modern software platform would beat out mainframes and custom development. But I promise you that it was anything but obvious then. It was not enough just to build great features. We had to get the boundaries just right. Too expansive, say including life insurance, and we would have built too thin a product. too narrow, say only insurers of a certain size or in a certain geography, and we would have certainly run out of market. There was a graveyard of dead software companies that had tried with the wrong scope and the wrong strategy. And we could not find a single example, a single precedent for a vertical core system startup that had delivered a strong return for its venture investors. But those precedents didn't matter. The right strategy did. It was an insurgent path that the incumbents could not follow. And for about 15 years, it defined all the core elements of what we would do. A company can survive some bad decisions and some bad hires. My company made plenty of those, but it cannot survive bad strategy. Consequently, as an investor today, I care much more about the rigor and the coherence of the strategy than almost any attribute of a potential investment, even more than its team, the technology, or the early financial performance. So, name the enemy, define the pure strategy. Last superpower. The insurgent can summon people to a cause. A cause, or a quest, a journey, a pilgrimage, an odyssey. It's an endeavor to be judged by its future aspiration, not its present reality. Again, a key contrast. Established companies have long ago forgotten that yearning, whereas the insurgent startup burns with it every day. In the early days of Guidewire, not only do we have no assets, we were a very unglamorous employer. Our dingy office was a short drive away from the most glamorous companies of our time: Google, Facebook, Apple, Salesforce. We served an industry that's like a punchline to the joke for the most boring thing you can imagine: insurance. And every aspect of our business was absurdly difficult. It was hard to design and build the product, even harder to sell it, and harder still to implement it. There was no way to palliate these truths, so we made it our identity. To the team we said, we cannot offer you a way to get rich, quickly or otherwise. What we can offer you is a way to do extremely demanding work for an indefinite period of time with no guarantee of success. And we're going to do something harder than climbing the mountain. We are going to tunnel straight through it, right into the rock face. This is the slide that I used at every company meeting for over a decade. Occasionally, a new team member would say, "But Marcus, what's on the other side of the mountain?" And I love getting this question, because then I would get to say, "More mountain." I sure hope you like mountain, because that's all we've got. Now, this was only partially a joke, because my founder experience taught me something surprising about human motivation. Shared adversity binds people together more than shared success. Shared austerity binds more than shared abundance. Of course, a quest cannot just be love of the struggle. It has to aim toward a higher cause and a higher purpose. My deepest learning was that shared purpose binds more than shared enjoyment. People long to be part of something greater than themselves. See, insurance is not just the punchline to a joke. It turns out to be thrillingly relevant to people on the worst days of their lives. If all the hedge funds and VC firms were to disappear, life would go on. But without insurance, ordinary people would be devastated by the catastrophes that are very improbable in the individual case, but are certainties in the aggregate. And it is our calling, our life's work, I would say, to serve the knowledge workers that provide this vital social service that insulates us from the depredations of a world full of terrible hazards. And it's an outrage that they struggle with such crappy and ancient technology provided by our enemies. Again, shared identity, shared austerity, and shared purpose are the crucible in which a young company finds its super motivation. And this too has been true of every asymmetric military victory throughout history. I don't want to convey the impression amidst all this storytelling that we got everything right. Nowhere close. We made a lot of mistakes, too many to inventory here. But I stand before you now with my survivor's tale to share one example of how a smaller, weaker force can defeat the larger, stronger one. It was this triad of inner assets that made the difference. My co-founders and I started with the same claims that every founder makes, that there is something wrong in the world, and it is personified in this enemy. Current approaches won't fix it. They're fundamentally broken, and we will defeat them with this specific strategy. And we alone can fix it, which is why we will summon with righteous conviction the unreasonably intense and sustained efforts of super talented people to this cause. It's so simple, right? Marshalling these three powers takes no capital, no luck. It's just intentions. So surely every startup should exploit them to the hilt. My friends, that is not what I observe. I am no longer a founder, I'm a VC. But it has surprised me, amidst all the brilliance and this energy that I see in the founders that I meet, how often they underexploit these intrinsic endowments of the insurgent. Ask yourself, have you really named your enemy? Are you filled with hatred for it? How lucid and explicit is your market diagnosis, and does it still match reality? Does your strategy intersect with absolute precision on the headpin of demand? And are you calling your team to shared sacrifice and righteous purpose every day? If not, you may not be harnessing the full power of your insurgency. You may be letting the status quo off too easily. I understand why, because I have lived it. You are exhausted by the relentless exigencies of selling and recruiting, investors asking for updates and assigning you annoying homework. You're tyrannized by the metrics that define your company's progress, and you are distracted by all of the mundane work of company building, negotiating real estate, and picking out the t-shirt colors. But I urge you, set all of that aside. Return to the core of your insurgent power. It is the duty and the superpower of that core founding team to revitalize it constantly. Okay, I have one last part of my company story to tell you. It's our moment of darkness. Around 7 years in, we were feeling pretty good. We were deep in the mountain, and it felt like we just might win. However, the enemy was not happy about our destruction of their Death Star. And so they launched a vicious counteroffensive. In 2008, Accenture sued us for patent infringement. The patents themselves were nonsense, and we thought that it was just a joke at first. But then it froze our pipeline, and every prospect said, "We know this lawsuit is ridiculous, but we can't buy from you until it's resolved. So work it out with Accenture, and then let us know." But of course, Accenture did not want to work it out. They wanted us dead. We were in the right, but the wheels of justice turn extremely slowly. And so we went 6 quarters without selling anything. And our existing customers started to question whether they should renew. And that meant that 8 years in, the most likely outcome for the company was either to be sold for scrap or maybe even go to zero. This was the most challenging period in my life, and I thought every dark thought that a person can think. The stronger, larger force was going to win after all. It did not turn out that way. And again, it was the insurgent endowment that saved us. No longer was it the ugly but innocent mainframe system that was the enemy. It was a $40 billion consulting firm that had attacked us with dishonor. They were the enemy. It was forbidden for anyone at Guidewire even to say Accenture. It was always the enemy. Our strategy became ever more precisely attuned to our market because we needed our customers to attest that our product was truly novel, evolving on a fundamentally different vector from Accenture's legacy solution. And our purpose was galvanized to a white-hot rage. We would prove this enemy wrong no matter what it took. Our work was transformed from toiling in the mine shaft to a holy crusade between right and wrong. And in the end, we won. We won because we were the smaller, weaker force that wanted it much, much more than the larger, stronger guys. And we won because the alternative was too terrible to contemplate. Within each of your companies is an insurgent drama of passionate creation. I say to you, with no irony or condescension, that as an entrepreneur, you are an agent of history. Thank you for the courage of what you have started. And remember, only you can fix it.